Welcome to Talk to Brazil with Tom Reaoch, the business connector to business in Brazil. Welcome to Talk to Brazil, the Business Connection, a leading Brazil business podcast talking about business in the world. I'm Tom Reaoch, an American living in Brazil and known for business networking and talking from my podcast studio in Campinas, São Paulo, Brazil. Today's guest is Yassine Regragui, and he's talking with us from Paris, France. We first met through mutual LinkedIn connections. Yassine has years of international working experience in fintech, including 6 years in China, at the Alibaba Group and at Deloitte. He was the first non-Chinese employee to join Alipay in China and to lead the multilingual apps product operations. He speaks 5 languages and lived in Hungary and Morocco. Yassine is also a guest speaker, a lecturer, and certified fintech expert. So with that, Yassine, thank you and welcome to Talk to Brazil Business Connection.
Hi, Tom. Thank you very much for this very complete introduction. Pleasure for me to be here.
Now, it's my pleasure to be with you because I know you've seen and you followed the cutting-edge technology in digital payments at the Alibaba and Alipay, and they're both probably benchmarks today. And it's been said that most Chinese handle all payments through smartphone devices, and that payments are basically cashless and touch-free. Here in Brazil, we've seen a strong movement towards digital payments and transactions as well. So the question to you is money as we know it in the world obsolete? And do we really still need banks?
Well, first of all, I think that money will still be necessary for our economy, for our financial system, etc. Indeed, if we take the example of China and my own experience, for 6 years, I didn't even need to use my card or my cash, and all payments went through like mobile. Mm-hmm. And even today, it's possible to pay with the face without a mobile phone in China. So for some countries like China or Sweden, the cash usage is really like very low compared to other countries. But the money as we know it, like coins and banknotes, will still exist for many years because these companies like Alibaba, etc., they try to make finance more and more inclusive,
right,
to touch the unbanked people. But I believe that central banks will still print coins and banknotes, but we see more and more usage of traditional mobile payments apps launching,
right.
And there is a new trend, we'll probably talk about it a bit later, about the digital currencies. And this is something really new, innovative, launched by central banks themselves. They are questioning themselves about having some digital currency,
right.
Because we see a lot of private platforms, either Alipay or Visa or PayPal or Bitcoin, launching their own platforms for payments, right, and for transacting money. So it will be interesting to follow that trend in the coming months.
Now, if we take the example of Brazil, and I'm sure in many other countries in the world, Brazil basically, for a large majority of the population, persons here are bankless. They don't have a bank account, either because they don't have credit or they don't have credit established or don't make enough money to be interested on banks. So basically, they're really outside the system and really dependent on handheld currencies because that's all they could get. So there really is a drive, and you mentioned the word inclusion, and I agree with you. It gives people in a country like Brazil and other emerging markets really to have a chance to include themselves in a commercial and transactional process. We have, like a local person here in Brazil that just sets up his hot dog stand or is selling fruit on the side of the road. He can now have digital transactions.
Bank account penetration is about 70%, according to JP Morgan latest figures. But we see also something else about the high penetration of internet. So people tend to use more and more mobile payments to to complete their either B2C or B2B payment. There is also another big trend in Brazil is the e-commerce. And right. I think e-commerce is a big driver for mobile payments because if, for example, you are using a website to shop, you will naturally use local or international online payment solutions. And that will drive you automatically to use your phone to pay in a shop or in a brick and mortar store, etc. However, you should know that for the 30% unbanked people in Brazil, these new payment solutions will help them to be banked and will drive them to have access to financial services, to have probably loans, access to loans, to savings, right. to insurance, etc. Of course, with different scale, with different fees, etc. But it's really the ultimate goal. And if we see the global population mm-hmm. worldwide, we have 1.7 billion people who don't have access to financial services. And the goal for every state is to allow everyone to have access to financial services for many reasons, but also to avoid money laundering, to right. avoid financing of terrorism, mm-hmm. etc. So it's also a way to control the whole transaction and to allow everyone to be inclusive within the economy.
Well, you mentioned that, and that actually is happening in Brazil. The fintech philosophy in Brazil has created in these last few years a number of digital banks, because really when we talk about banks, you generally think of the brick and mortar type operation with you walk in the door and even the ATMs, which probably was the first step in transaction. But we do have several digital banks that just exist online. And these, as you mentioned, are attracting persons in a very simple, I'm saying a non-complex way, really to give them an option, what you've just said. And that I've seen that happening right now, of offering life insurance, of offering other types of services besides just transaction and payment.
Exactly, Tom. And that's exactly what's happening now in China, because I mentioned about my 6 years using only my phone to pay, mm-hmm. but you should know that those apps in China, like Alipay, launched by Alibaba, owned by Ant Group, and its competitor WeChat Pay, that is owned by Tencent, mm-hmm. are not only payments apps. So, of course, you can do like traditional financial transactions, either payments or insurance or credit, loan, etc. But more than 50% of the operations will be for lifestyle services. Mm-hmm. For instance, you can use Alipay to talk with your friends because you have a chatting feature. You mm-hmm. can call a cab with it. You can book a flight ticket. You can even sign like a rental agreement within Alipay. You can check the different services, etc. So you have more than 1,000 services available within the app. Wow. So people today tend to use more these apps because they can do everything with mm-hmm. it. It's even called a super app. Same with WeChat. WeChat started as a messaging app. They included a payment feature that today is becoming more a payment plus lifestyle mm-hmm. because it's offering more than what is payment. And what is even more interesting is that this innovation is really started from China.
Right.
And
right.
we have like other Southeast Asian countries, such as Singapore, Indonesia, etc. They launched their own super apps like Gojek or Grab. Mm-hmm. And the biggest wave of these super apps is coming to the West because we see Google that announced the launch of Plex, which is the new generation of Google Pay.
Right. That
is a super app because you can either pay, you have rewards, and I think the year 2021 will be full of surprises in terms of fintech because it really includes lifestyle plus payment.
Well, you picked up a point because, as I mentioned here in Brazil, and you said that now United States, but it seems that Western cultures are all playing catch up. And when things first came out in China, they were sort of discredited because they really weren't understood. If you're mentioning Google's really chasing after leadership. They're losing because they aren't all inclusive, even for all of the things that they do have. But let me change pace with you. When you went to China, and I mentioned here that you were one of the first non-Chinese in Alibaba. How did you feel being non-Chinese in a Chinese atmosphere and culture? Talking about inclusion, how did you fit?
Well, that's a very interesting question, Tom. Actually, I would lie if I say that it was perfect, because it's kind of hard to adapt to a Chinese culture. It would be maybe easier for me to adapt to an American culture, to a Brazilian culture, to an African culture, because it's even closer, geographically speaking. Mm-hmm. However, in China, we have a totally different language and different way of life, different way of work, etc. So actually, when I joined Alibaba, I was not speaking very well Chinese, mm-hmm. and I had to adapt to my management that by the months and the years, right. They were exclusively Chinese who didn't speak any English. So I was forced to learn Chinese. And actually, that led me to learn Mandarin. And once I learned it, I felt really different from non-speaking Chinese, because people trusted me, because I could get a lot of budget, etc. So actually, speaking Chinese can be a really big game changer, because people trust you, because you can understand many things, etc. And there are a lot of specifications about the Chinese culture. For instance, the importance of a supervisor would be different than France, for example. Mm-hmm. For example, I can never say to my supervisor no. However, in France, I can negotiate with him.
In France, you start out saying no, right?
Exactly. So it was a kind of shock to adapt, but adapting to changes is a part of the DNA of Alibaba, for example, because it's an internet company and it's changing every day. I was working on an app that changes several times a day. And if we don't adapt to these changes, it's impossible to move forward. And that's one of the key strengths of a company like Alibaba, or a big internet company in China.
Well, though that's true. What you just said is true in really anywhere. I'm an American. I've come to Brazil, and I agree with you. When I first came, I didn't speak Portuguese, and really it was odd. It was difficult. It was the same thing. It was either through hand gestures or other ways of trying to be understood and understanding. But it was when I started, and for the same reason, I realized that I needed to speak Portuguese. If I'm going to stay here and work here, I need to speak the language. Because very few, and until today, very few Brazilians speak English. So it's learning the language, and once you do learn a language and you become, you have to become completely fluent, but once they realize that you do understand and you can be understood, it changes the way they look at you. And that's any culture. And you speak 5 languages. Totally. I'm sure you feel the same thing. You mentioned to me before that you lived in Hungary. I'm sure when you went to Hungary, if you could speak a local language, it's a whole different ballgame. Exactly. And
actually, I can summarize it into gaining trust of people, because when you speak their language, they understand that you know better than their culture, that you make the effort to understand them, etc. So the approach they have with you is really different. Mm-hmm. And in China, it's even more, it's stronger, because we know the history of China. We know it was a very poor country 40 years ago, mm-hmm. and now opening up more and more. So for them, seeing a foreigner speaking their language will even bring a lot of value added for their relationship, and I was considered as a Chinese in the company. Mm-hmm. I was not considered as a foreigner. Mm-hmm. I was evaluated as a Chinese because I was speaking their language, and had to make even more efforts, because I had difficulties of a foreigner and then difficulties of a Chinese. So I never regret that experience, because it helped me to learn a lot of things, to make mistakes. And as Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, says that never give up.
Right. Never give up.
Exactly. We never have to give up and move forward because that's the culture, actually.
Well, that's anywhere. But I mentioned, that we first met through mutual LinkedIn connections, right? And I think all of our connections, what all of them have in common is something to do with China. And you're in France. We did not connect through a French connection, nor a Brazilian connection. We connected. So here's an American in Brazil and a French person living in Paris but having worked in China. We connected through connections that are in China. And they're very similar. Most of them are foreigners, expats and others like yourself who've gone there and have adapted to the culture, understand the culture, and understand the benchmarking that you said that it offers. And each one has become a specialist and an expert in their own category, and that's fantastic.
Exactly, and I'm really grateful to LinkedIn for helping us to connect each other.
Right. No, and so today really you can be anywhere, right? And you can still maintain your Chinese presence. You can still follow the fintech as you do, and you maintain your expertise.
Totally.
Now, as you see, and it is expanding, what do you see in the future when we're talking fintech? Where is this going worldwide? Obviously, I think China will still lead, but is it spreading out through the rest of the world?
Well, I think there are three main trends I see, especially next year and in the coming years. The first one is, as I mentioned earlier, is the digital currency. Because we see some countries like China who experimented for the first time digital currency. So they experimented in Shenzhen, which is a city in south of China. Mm-hmm. They distributed the equivalent of 50,000 red envelopes, which is a really traditional envelope in China that is given for celebration. Mm-hmm. They offered for free these envelopes to use in several stores. Right. So this is a very specific let's say, way of payment because it's offered by the central bank. Mm-hmm. And other countries like Bahamas is the first country in the world who really issued a digital currency by the central bank in the world. We see Europe also trying to evaluate the feasibility of launching a digital currency. The US as well. Right. A lot of different countries also trying to launch that. To face the rise of tech giants like the GAFA or the BATX in China. Mm-hmm. And we see also the rise of a lot of fintech. So now the central banks want really to take action in digital payment. So this is the first trend. The second trend is what I call the open finance. Mm-hmm. And actually, it's about any company can offer their own financial services, although they are not a financial company. Mm-hmm. Because we used to speak about open banking, like a bank to offer right. different services, non-financial services. But today, if we see Uber, they, of course, are, let's say, a mobility and a way to move from a place to another one. Right. And today are offering financial services as well, a mm-hmm. way to pay with their app. Right. So this model, I call it the open finance. And the third trend, I think there is a big switch into what I call new ways of payment. Mm-hmm. So it's connected to either AI. For example, in China, we can use our face to pay. Right. It's using biometrics. It's using different technologies actually to accelerate this payment. And we saw the example of Ant Group in China. Right. Ant Group that was supposed to be the biggest IPO this year, but was postponed to next year. And I believe that Ant Group today is not what we call a fintech company, but it's a tech fin, mm-hmm. because they are a technology company. Mm-hmm. They're using blockchain, AI, cloud, etc. Mm-hmm. And thanks to this technology, they are offering financial services. So we see this company as an example, but we will see more and more companies like Ant Group, and we could see the size of Ant Group. They were about to raise right. about $37 billion right. in China. So we'll see the appearance of new tech fin. Google can be a tech fin. Mm-hmm. Apple can be a tech fin.
Mm-hmm.
So I think next year will be full of surprises in terms of fintech.
Well, I think it's fantastic what you just mentioned of the open financing. So actually, many companies, finance will really become an accessory of whatever their business is. And it's just going to be another add-on. And what you just mentioned, AI, cloud, blockchain, these are the new keywords and buzzwords that every company needs to adapt to very quickly. Whether it's brick and mortar, whatever you do, if it's a service company, a manufacturer company, whatever, the sooner you adapt and understand that. You mentioned the AI and the facial recognition of making payments, which is a standard in China. That's something coming, and a lot of discredit becoming, well, I don't want people to see me. I don't want to show my face. But today, the plus side of the pandemic, if there is a plus side, it has actually shown what the opportunities of these technologies are, where we're in a point where we really don't want to be in physical contact with people or places for a health reason. And if we didn't have these alternatives, literally, how could some people survive or companies survive? There are more companies, even in Brazil today. We have, like, in our area in Campinas, we have like 2 e-commerce companies being developed and starting up almost by the hour. So it's a whole new world, even for the mom and pop store. So there is a way to survive and grow, because there's more digital, there's more global activity than there is local. You know, for as big as the local area is, you're still confined yourself.
Exactly. And I think that the financial services are not only reserved for banks anymore.
Right.
And because I think it started from 2008 and the subprime financial crisis that really affected banks globally.
Right.
And there were other companies, startups, who focused on like user experience, who focused on providing innovations, etc., and where banks were not focusing at all.
Mm-hmm.
So today we have new companies who have access to data, who have a better user experience, that are offering better services, and the customer today is just looking for an easy service. He's not looking for going to a bank and queuing to get his money, to transfer money, or to ask for a loan. He just wants to get it as soon as possible, as easy as possible. And these companies, either my Starbucks or my Uber or any other firm that I use, for example, every day, should be able to offer me financial services.
Right.
So this is the open finance trend.
And that's really the game changer, right? Or the deal breaker, if you want to deal with companies that offer that full service, right? And those that don't will just be the local mom and pop store. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but to grow and to scale will become difficult.
Totally. And I believe that banks will never disappear, but their role and their job will change. And it will be less and less in the front end, but it will be in the back end, using technologies, using their traditional like financial flows, relations with the governments, maybe providing licenses, etc. But it will never be again the role we saw it in the past years. It will really be different from the past.
Well, from traditional companies, when we're back to the brick and mortar, what's your perception? And talking right now about Europe, are companies aware of what's happening, or are they still trying to adjust to all of this?
Well, actually, they are trying to adjust, especially with the, let's say, the empowerment of different European governments, especially financially, because they help them in case they want to go online. They help them financially. And if I take the example of France, today we have 1 out of 3 stores which are digital, while in China it's almost 100% of the stores.
Right.
So it's really an accelerator. This coronavirus was an accelerator for these stores to go online. especially with the pandemic, but it's still really slow and takes time, especially culturally speaking, because people prefer to have human interaction, people prefer to check the product, etc. But we see definitely an increase of e-commerce payments, e-commerce purchase, and it is a positive sign for digital, but it shouldn't be 100% digital. And this is a new trend coming in from China that is called O2O, so it's online to offline, new retail, and it's actually about connecting the online to the offline. So you can, for example, do what we call a click and collect. You can select your product and go to take it in the store, or check the product in the store and buy it from your website directly.
So O2O. So we got O2O, we got AI, we got blockchain, we have cloud, right? But in Paris, do you still have, this is the question, do you still once in a while go downstairs and sit at the cafe and have some coffee?
Of course, because this is a part of the French culture. We will never have coffee online.
And maybe get some bread once in a while, right?
Exactly. Well, so I think this is a part of the French culture and can never disappear because it's the most traditional thing that people like to have, and the thing we miss the most during this pandemic and lockdown is going to a terrace and having a good coffee and a good baguette in our favorite bakery, etc.
Well, I've interviewed another person. He's a Brazilian who lives in Paris, and what he did, he set up his company, moved to Paris some years ago, and really his company, he works out of cafes. And that's where he meets his customers. And this is before the pandemic. So this is his business. So he's into digital marketing. He creates different platforms for companies here in Brazil. He's Brazilian there, but where do you work? It's any cafe. And that's it. And for the same reason, I can invite people in, and they'll come in and have a coffee, and we'll talk and understand what their company wants and does, and I'll create a whole platform for them. I'll create a new logo or design, and that's how he does it. So I'm happy to hear that's still in business, and it will go on.
Of course.
Okay. Well, Yassine, I want to thank you again. We're coming to the end of our time, but I really appreciate you sharing not only your time, but your experience with us and our listeners. Okay.
Thank you very much, Tom, for this invitation. It was a pleasure for me to share this experience with you, and hope to catch up soon.
And for our listeners, just for them to know, you can find more about Yassine on LinkedIn, and you will find him, and his name is Yassine Regragui, and it's Yassine, and the last name Regragui. And he also has a website, which is his name as well. And again, YassineRegragui.com. Correct, Yassine?
Exactly. Thank you very much, Tim.
And we'll be in touch, and success and more success, not only in Paris, but throughout the world. All right?
Thank you very much, and I welcome all the questions and happy to share more experiences with you.
Very good. And I'd like to remember and thank our audience for our sponsor, Focus MI Market Intelligence. Focus MI specializes in market research for the Brazilian agricultural market, and more about them on their site, which is focusmi.com. Visit our website, talktobrazil.com. Find our previous shows of Talk to Brazil, which are also available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, and many more. So remember, when you talk to Tom, you talk to Brazil and the world. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Tom Reaoch on Talk to Brazil, the business connector to Brazil.